telephone line, calling in from France, we have original drummer from the legendary group, the Yardbirds, the iconic Hall of Fame rock star. We welcome in Jim McCarty. Jim, Brian C., thank you so much for being on my program.
Thank you for inviting me, Brian. Very nice to be here.
Oh, it's an honor, sir. Jim, talk a little bit about your upbringing and when you first developed a love for music.
Well, I was brought up in the southwest of London, in the suburbs of London, about 15, 20 miles out. It was all, very, very nice, sort of calm area. And I really got into music by playing in the Boys Brigade band, and I was playing the sort of marching snare drum when I was about 16, and I used to be the main lead snare drum player, and I used to play the sort of marching drum, and then all the other drummers used to copy me, which I liked. It was sort of a sense of power. And then I got into early, American rock and roll, like Elvis and Buddy Holly and the Crickets and Gene Vincent and all that stuff. And we had a band at school. We used to play all those songs.
Now, Jim, at what age did your aspirations of becoming a performer first hit you?
Well, I don't know if I had aspirations. It was just a question of playing in a band, and I enjoyed playing in the school band, and then later on, it was great being in the Yardbirds, of course, and we took off, and I don't know if I had aspirations. I just found it a lot of fun to play that sort of music that we did, particularly the American blues music, which was great fun to play in those days.
Absolutely. Now, do you recall the first band you ever performed in, and with whom?
Well, that was probably in the school band, just a local band around the Hampton area, Hampton-Richmond area, which is like southwest London. And in the band, funnily enough, was Paul Samuel Smith, who became the bass player in the Yardbirds. He was always a very close friend of mine. And at that time, he played the lead guitar. And he played one of the early Fender Strats that came into England. And we had another guy that had a very early sort of Chet Atkins Gibson or whatever it was he played. A Gretsch, that's right, a Gretsch guitar. That was based on the Chet Atkins model. And we played that sort of country stuff and, the early American rock and roll.
Yeah, let me ask you, Jim, how did the original band members of the Yardbirds meet? And did all the band members first get along well?
Yeah, we all used to hang out in the same sort of pubs in the suburbs, and we used to go to a pub called the Crown in Kingston, which was right by the River Thames, right by the river. And it was like a bohemian type pub, where beatniks used to hang out, musicians and a lot of artists and painters. And most of the guys actually were from Kingston Art School, including, Keith Relf and Eric Clapton, and Chris Dreyer. They were all in the art school stream. Paul Samuel Smith and myself, we were at a high school, a grammar school called Hampton Grammar, and we all met there, and we had the idea to form a band together. Keith and Paul already played in a sort of country blues band called the Metropolis Blues Quartet, and Topham, who was the earliest lead guitar player, the one before Eric. Him and Chris were great mates, Chris Dreyer. They were friends, and they decided to form another group with me, and then we all amalgamated with Chris, with Keith and Paul, and suddenly became the Yardbirds, and we went from there. And we all got on, we all got on very well.
Yeah, as rock history notes, I mean, three of the iconic guitarists of all time came out of the Yardbirds: Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and Eric Clapton. What is your recollection of a young Clapton? Did the band members have an inkling that he would turn out to be such a legendary guitarist?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he always had a very strong profile, and he was always destined to be, a star, as you say. I mean, he seemed quite an individual, and he liked to dress up in the right clothes. He liked to make sure he looked good when he played the guitar, and he had a sort of an attitude which was a bit of a star attitude. And actually, when I first met him, I didn't like him. I thought he was a bit too cocky. But,
oh, really?
But I got used to him, and we ended up being jokers together, and we had a great sense of humour going within the band, and we had a lot of laughs. And he always attracted when we played the gigs. I noticed a lot of the people always went over to his side of the stage, which was unusual because normally the audience would be more fixated on the lead singer, Keith. But it wasn't the case so much with Eric. That they sort of were very interested in him as well.
Now, you were there in the very beginning of the Yardbirds. You played with Page, Beck, and Clapton. Would you say that their styles different, and how so?
Oh, yeah. They were all very, very individual, very different. Eric was a very pure blues guitar player, and he wanted to stick that way. He didn't like it when we started to go pop, and he didn't approve of that. He wanted to keep playing blues, and he went off to play with John Mayall in Blues Breakers. Jeff was totally different. He was a blues player, but he would play a much wider range of styles. He was quite happy to do all sorts of weird feedback sounds and very futuristic sounds, and use a lot of pedals when he played, and that really suited us because that gave us the Yardbirds sound, I think, the sound that people remember. And he was very much part of the band, making that futuristic music. And then when Jimmy Page came into the band, he was a session player at the time, so he was used to playing sessions in London for the records and stuff, and he was used to being directed what to play, and so he was much more disciplined and much more businesslike in his playing, and whereas Jeff might play a totally different solo every night, Jimmy would play much similar solo every night. So they were quite different in their outlook.
We're talking to the legendary Jim McCarty of the Yardbirds. Jim, the top iconic songs of the Yardbirds that come to my mind is For Your Love, Heart Full of Soul, Shape of Things, to mention a few. What can you tell us about each of those songs that I just mentioned? Do you recall recording them? How was the origination of and the construction of those songs? How did it come to life?
Both For Your Love and Heart Full of Soul, they were both written by Graham Gouldman, who was a young songwriter at the time. He was a few years younger than us, and he was in a band in Manchester called the Mockingbirds, and we managed to hear his demo of For Your Love, which was like very simple with a 12-string guitar and bongo drums. And funnily enough, the guy that had the demo was a publisher who was in the audience watching us play with the Beatles at their Christmas show in 1964. They always had a Christmas show every year, the Beatles, and we were on the bill that year. And this publisher had For Your Love, and he saw us playing, and he thought, this song would suit the group. So he got that song over to our manager, Giorgio, and we all went and listened to the song, and we did our version of it, and of course it became a big hit all over the world. The same with Heart Full of Soul, which was his next song, which we decided to do at the time with the sitar playing the guitar riff. But in the end, the sitar sound didn't quite go with the group sound, and Jeff Beck played the part, and it sounded a lot better, much more electric, much more exciting. And we recorded that in another studio in London. And then Shapes of Things was recorded in Chess Studios in Chicago, which was very exciting for us, to come to Chicago where we'd heard all that great blues music, and go into Chess Studios also where they'd produced that wonderful music. And that was a big bonus for us to go there and record, and it was all very exciting. And we did Shapes of Things, which wasn't at all bluesy. We sort of wrote the song, in a couple of sessions beforehand, wrote the basis of the song, and did most of the recording in there, and that was great fun. And I always remember going in, looking at this terrible beaten-up old drum kit that was in the corner, and the engineer said, "Oh, here's the drum kit." I thought, "Oh no, it's gonna be awful," and it sounded great. It was really tuned up beautifully and was great, and really worked on the song.
Jim, if you can, take me back to the 1960s. There was so much talent back then, the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks. What do you recall of all that talent? Was it competition amongst the Yardbirds? Did you all get along? Were they rivals, jealousy? Take me back, if you can, to the 1960s and all that competition.
Well, we played with all those bands actually at different times. We did a tour. We played a few odd gigs, as I said before, with the Beatles. And we did a whole tour with the Rolling Stones, not a huge tour, but a tour of England, and also a tour of England with the Kinks. And of course we were all competing to go down better. We wanted to, get a bigger audience reaction. But it didn't happen much of the time with the Stones. But there was one gig I remember we played where we had Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck in the band, and they were firing on all cylinders. It was one of those gigs that really happened. That wasn't always the case, but it did happen on this night. And we went on right before the Stones, and when we came off, we had incredible encores, and I think the Stones got a bit worried that night. But that was the only night,
Now, Jim, is it a fact that the Yardbirds produced the debut of Led Zeppelin on that Scandinavian tour?
Well, what happened was when the Yardbirds split up in 1968, we had a whole load of dates in the book. We had an American tour booked, and we had some Scandinavian dates booked. And Jimmy Page decided to do the gigs as they were with his new band, with Robert and John Bonham and stuff, and call it the New Yardbirds for a beginning, just to fulfill the dates. As the dates were there, he thought we might as well do them. So that's what happened. I wasn't actually involved in those dates, but they did them as the Zeppelin lineup. And then they changed the name from the New Yardbirds to the Zeppelin to make everything clear. So that was how that story was.
Now, was it true that in '92 you got called with an idea to reform the Yardbirds? Can you tell us a little bit about that venture?
Well, in '92 we got inducted into the U.S. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was great. It gave us a lot of confidence and brought back a lot of memories, and we met a lot of great people on that night, and it was very nice to be honoured in that way. And at the time, I was playing again in a little blues band in Shepherd's Bush in London, and we played a little pub that was like the old days. It was just like playing in the Crawdaddy Club, packed with people and playing all these old blues songs and things, all with local London musicians. And Chris Dreyer and Paul Samuel Smith used to come down occasionally, and Jeff Beck as well, to see us play. And actually, it wasn't 92, it was a few years later, it was about 95. I got a call from an agent in Lancashire saying, did we want to reform the Yardbirds? And I said, well, I don't think I could do it on my own. It needs to have Chris Dreyer involved or someone else. And so Chris came on board, and we used some of the musicians that I've been playing with in the blues pub, including a guitarist from Detroit called John Iden, who'd been singing lead and playing lead guitar. And actually, he's in the present edition of the Yardbirds, so he's stuck with me for a while.
Now, as you mentioned, in 92, the Yardbirds gets enshrined into the Hall of Fame. Congratulations. How important was that for you personally, and do you remember getting that call on the induction ceremony?
Yes, I do. It was all very exciting. I remember we were put forward maybe a couple of times before, and we never got voted in. And then I got the call to go to that ceremony, and we all went, and we all met up again together, and we all had a lot of fun, and met some great people, and it was a great honour to be inducted with people like Johnny Cash and Jimi Hendrix. He wasn't there, of course, but his band, and he was inducted, posthumously. And Booker T and the MGs, people like that. Fantastic people were inducted at the same time. And Johnny Cash, funnily enough, was one of our heroes, and we used to play his songs when we were back in the school band. So that was something special.
Yeah, and you're still performing your hits, correct? You have a website. Do you want to mention your website?
Yes, it's www.theyardbirds.com, and I have my own website, www.jimmccarty.co.uk. I think there's a Yardbirds US site as well. There's a Facebook page for the Yardbirds, and also Jim McCarty. So there's a lot out there on the net.
Now, this is a fascinating achievement here, that the Yardbirds on the Rolling Stones list of top 100 greatest artists of all time, the Yardbirds is number 89. So, I mean, that shows the work that the Yardbirds have done. I mean, you must be very proud of that accomplishment, huh?
Well, I am. I'm very proud, and it's all the more funny when you think, when we started the group, we had no idea at all. And in fact, when I started playing back in 62, 63, I was working in the stock exchange in London, and I started playing in the group in the evenings. And it was much too tiring, so I had to give up my job. And I went to my boss and I said, I'm in this band, I'm going to have to give up the job. But, when the band breaks up in a year or two, can I come and have my job back? Which, about 60 years ago.
And what was his response?
Well, of course, yes, my job was open. It probably still is.
A tough question here, Jim. Best concert you ever performed in, and why?
That's a difficult one. We had some great shows with Jeff Beck, It was always very difficult with Jeff because you never quite knew what mood he was in or whether he was going to like the equipment, because the equipment would change from night to night, in those old days. We always sort of hired in equipment, and if we got the right equipment, we could have a great gig, and we had some great gigs. And I remember doing a club on Sunset Strip in Los Angeles, which I can't remember the name of it now. I'm sure somebody would remember, but it was one of those great nights where it all gelled, and not a big venue, but maybe a couple of hundred people, and it was a great show. And in a small way, and the band played very well. We improvised really well together. It was one of those magic shows. But we have done some great shows. We played with the Beatles in Paris. Funny enough, we were playing right before the Beatles, and I was playing Ringo's drum kit. We had no amplification for the drums in those days. They weren't mic'd up. So I was playing, hitting them pretty hard. And we got to the last number, and I noticed I'd smashed his snare drum. And I was so embarrassed, I broke the head, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought, I'm in trouble here, But one of the roadies came up and said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll fix that." And then Ringo waved his fist at me, in a joke. So it was all okay in the end.
Well, James, we're going to play a couple of minutes of some of those legendary songs. Sean, let's play some Yardbirds. Jim, what goes through your mind listening to some of those original hits?
Well, I was trying to work out where they were recorded. Probably, there's probably more than one version of each of those things, I'm sure. And then I think, oh, what did I play there? It's all very intricate, and I'm thinking about the recording and what we played, but it's great. It's great to hear those songs all together like that. It's a very strong repertoire.
And my final question: what do you think of today's music?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think it's quite as exciting live or quite as strong arrangement-wise as the old songs. Particularly some of the old Beatles stuff. It's all a bit more narrow, but there's some interesting things that come out here and there. You hear some old retro bands that are pretty good, and it's a wide range of music. The thing I don't like really is the auto tune. When you hear the auto tune on so many records, it gets a bit much for me.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate your time, and thank you for all the music you've given America.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Anytime, and best of luck.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care, Jim. And the website is jamesmccarty.com, jamesmccarty.com. And that was Jim McCarty of the iconic Hall of Fame group, the Yardbirds. Until next week, happy collecting to all.